Okay, let's just get right into it. If you have ever poured your absolute heart into serving others and then suddenly found yourself running on completely empty, well, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? If you've been doing this for a while, you know that exact feeling. It's waking up profoundly exhausted, feeling this sudden, really strange cynicism toward the very people you want to help, and looking at the work you once loved with this quiet, desperate desire to just walk away. That deep soul-level fatigue is incredibly heavy. So today, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the hidden mechanics of true endurance, focusing specifically on how to avoid burnout, replenish that well when it runs completely dry, and actually finish well.
So the big question is, how do we not just survive, but actually keep the glow of ministry going all the way to the very end? It is so easy to assume that burnout is just an inevitable hazard of the job. You work hard, you get tired, and naturally the fire fades, right? I mean, we see it happen all around us. We constantly watch these incredibly passionate, vibrant people slowly transform into cynical, exhausted managers of their own spiritual decline. But I really want to challenge that assumption today. How can a believer actually maintain their spiritual zeal over decades of demanding, draining service without turning bitter? Because here is the crucial point. The Bible actually promises a fruitful finish. We do not just survive. We can serve God with joy and zeal until the absolute end. The Apostle Paul talks about never flagging in zeal and instead being aglow with the Spirit. Think about what being aglow practically looks like for a second. It means maintaining a palpable warmth, a genuine, resilient excitement for the work, and a deep, authentic love for people, rather than just mechanically going through the motions. This is in stark contrast to the sad reality of so many well-meaning leaders who slowly lose their excitement along the way. But it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. To really figure out how to maintain that glow, we are going to dive into some brilliant insights from Ajith Fernando's book, Joyful Perseverance. Specifically, we're going to distill the absolute essence of Chapter 2, which focuses all on longevity in ministry. Now, Ajith Fernando isn't just offering ivory tower theories here. He is drawing on nearly 5 decades of hands-on ministry in Sri Lanka. He has served in incredibly demanding, often dangerous, and just thoroughly exhausting circumstances. And because his insights are so deeply battle-tested, he's able to reveal what I like to call a practical theological secret weapon for longevity. But warning, it requires a fundamental shift in how we view our daily energy supply.
See, our culture constantly praises hustle, human grit, and relentless effort. We are totally conditioned to think that if we just push harder, if we grind it out, and if we just rely on our raw talent and willpower, we will eventually make it. But here's the truth. Relying on raw talent is a fast track to burnout. The ultimate secret to longevity isn't about pushing yourself to the brink. You simply cannot muscle your way to spiritual endurance. It is about something entirely different.
It actually all hinges on a single, incredibly powerful Greek word, eleo. Now, it translates broadly to mercy, but the deeper, more profound definition is God's pity on a helpless person. And here is the massive paradigm shift. True longevity in service is based squarely on God's grace and mercy. It's His pity on our complete, utter helplessness to do it on our own. Now, why is this so insanely hard for us? Well, because capable leaders naturally want to be the ones doing the helping, not the helpless ones needing pity. It requires immense vulnerability to admit that we are running on fumes. It's admitting that we don't have the strength, and instead choosing to rely entirely on His limitless supply.
And that brings us directly to the Apostle Paul's foundational secret. It's captured beautifully in 2 Corinthians 4:1. Therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart. Notice he uses that exact concept of mercy, eleo. Just think about Paul's life for a moment. The guy faced literal shipwrecks, he was beaten with rods, he was stoned, and he faced the crushing daily pressure of managing all those early churches. Imagine the sheer physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion of his reality. Yet, he never lost his passion. Why? Because he knew his ministry wasn't powered by his own grit. His reliance on eleo was profound and hard-earned. He was powered entirely by the mercy of God.
To bring this into the real world, Fernando shares this incredibly powerful personal anecdote in Chapter 2. He was scheduled to speak at the massive Urbanus student conference. He had traveled all the way from Sri Lanka, leaving at midnight on Christmas Day. So picture the severe physical exhaustion, the disorienting jet lag, and on top of all that, a crushing, heavy anxiety that he was going to stand in front of thousands of college students and completely ruin his message. The weight of expectations was just suffocating. But right before he went on stage, his colleague, Leighton Ford, noticed his visible distress,
laid hands on him, and simply prayed. Fernando notes that immediately his deep anxiety just vanished. That heavy burden was replaced by pure delight and profound freedom as he spoke. That right there is the miraculous power of relying on mercy in our moments of absolute weakness. You know, if you think about the famous lyrics to the hymn Amazing Grace, they actually map out the timeline of a believer's life and endurance perfectly. Walk through this progression with me. First, through many dangers, toils, and snares, that is just an honest acknowledgement of the brutal reality of hardship and pain. But then, "'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far." That is the present reality, an active reliance on God's mercy right now. And finally, "And grace will lead me home," the future promise. Grace isn't just for the starting line, you guys. It is the continuous, unbreakable fuel line that sustains the entire journey from start to finish. If you want a really clear picture of what this looks like over a lifetime, let me introduce you to Dr. Julian C. McPheeters. Back when Fernando was a seminary student, Dr. McPheeters was in his late 80s. Picture this scene: a room full of 20-something seminary students, probably heavily caffeinated and barely keeping their eyes open, being completely outpreached and out-energized by a retired octogenarian seminary president. He would preach these deep, expository sermons entirely from memory, and he didn't even need a microphone because his voice just boomed with passion. How on earth did he maintain that kind of fire into his late 80s? Well, his secret was remarkably simple, yet deeply profound. A friend of his noted his daily routine. Every single morning, this 80-something-year-old man would literally jump out of bed and shout the words of Psalm 118:24. "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." Think about your own mornings for a second. What is your first thought when you wake up? Is it a wave of dread? A crushing mental to-do list? Dr. McPheeters actively chose to claim every single day for the Lord. He chose anticipation over anxiety, eagerly waiting for the blessings that God's grace would bring, rather than dwelling on his aging body or past hardships. But what happens when things go wrong? Because, let's be real, in any ministry, deep suffering and pain are absolutely inevitable. We always have a choice in how we process them, though. A worldly perspective results in a preoccupation with pain, letting the trauma define you, consume your thoughts, and utterly drain your energy. But the grace perspective views suffering as a conduit to experience deeper grace. When you are helpless, your grit finally fails, forcing you to stop relying on yourself. And in that exact space of helplessness, you get to experience God's pity and mercy in a profoundly intimate way that you honestly never could when everything was going perfectly. Let's look at the ultimate test of this perspective. John and Betty Stam were young, passionate missionaries serving in China in the 1930s. They were only 27 and 28 years old. They had their whole lives ahead of them, completely dedicated to bringing hope to others. But tragically, they were captured and martyred by communist soldiers. This is the absolute extreme of suffering, fear, and loss in ministry. So, could the perspective of grace possibly hold up even in the face of sudden, violent death? John Stam's own words answer that question profoundly. Listen to this. "Take away everything I have, but do not take away the sweetness of walking and talking with the King of Glory." Even when facing execution, the sweetness of God's grace provided an unbreakable, joyous contentment. It is just a staggering testament. It proves that the joy found in God's mercy is infinitely deeper and stronger than any earthly pain or terror you could ever face. Okay, so let's pull all of this together. How do we practically apply this Chapter 2 framework to our own lives so we stay fresh through the inevitable ups and downs? Well, here are your core takeaways. First, just like Dr. McPheeters, jump into your day actively anticipating the blessings grace will bring. Second, stop trying to be the unstoppable hero. Embrace vulnerability and rely on God's pity for your helplessness. Third, actively let grace heal the wounds from your disappointments instead of harboring silent bitterness. And finally, avoid the habits and sins that hinder your supply of grace. Think of unaddressed sin like a literal kink in a garden hose. It cuts off the vital flow of mercy you desperately need to survive the friction of daily ministry. I want to leave you with this lingering question to reflect on as we wrap up. What things can you do to maintain a grace perspective, especially when things go wrong? When the ministry gets incredibly tough, when the cynic inside you starts getting a little louder, and when the burnout creeps in, how will you choose to rely less on your own raw strength and more on God's sustaining mercy? Take a real moment to ponder that shift from grit to grace today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer of the source material, and hey, keep pursuing that joyful perseverance.